And we both studied architecture together, in fact, in Bolton Street many years ago. So we would have started off working together on architectural projects 25 years ago, and not working very well on them either. Like, we used to argue a lot at that point. And so when we went to Paris, I think both of us would have probably been more suited to studying art, but coming from quite relatively academic, not traditional Irish families, everybody thought it was better to do architecture, to get a good job. But so we did that, and then when we got to Paris, we both started developing as artists individually. So I was painting initially, and Denis was doing installation. And slowly, but quite quickly really, I think, we started to, help each other and get involved and discuss. We were always discussing the ideas together, so the projects very quickly started to be joint projects, and so that would have been the initial collaboration. And then we worked for quite a long time with different artist groups in Paris, so cooperatives and that type of thing, and they would always have been joint exhibitions and things that we worked with people, inviting people into the work and that type of thing. So we've been engaged in that ongoing collaboration for many years with each other and with other people. So it comes very, very naturally to us.
We were video artists, traditional video artists, if you can call it that, in terms that we made films and then you'd set them up in a gallery and people would come in and they'd sit in front of them like they were sitting in front of the television. And at a certain point we began to sort of think, well, one of the things that pushed us into what we do would be an interest in situationism and this sort of reaction against the spectacle, and yet that's what we're doing. We're making things that people sit down passively in front of. And we said, this isn't good enough anymore. We want to try and make a situation where we're interacting with the world and interacting with the people we're showing our work to, and making much more of a complex interaction with people, rather than just making something which we then leave for people to see, and there can be no conversation between us. So that was why we started to focus on workshops, and once we started doing that, naturally that brought us into the possibility of doing educational projects and school projects, and it tended to favour that particular direction our work would have taken.
Education or in social contexts, often in adult learning contexts as well.
I think one of the first times we ever did this was we wanted to set up a camera in a space and make a film in the space, and then take the set and the furniture out of the space and project the film that we'd made in the space, and have people walking around the space that the film was made in, and kind of mixed into the film in a very simple way. And I think that was the first time we ever did. It was in a collector's house in Normandy, in Brittany, and we set up the camera permanently on the wall. We made the film, which actually involved the children of the house murdered me by giving me a poisoned cup of tea, and then wrapped me up in the carpet and hid me in the cupboard, and then Anne comes in and is wondering what's happened to her husband, and it was all made as a silent movie, which and I fall out of the cupboard, and this is all made as a kind of a silent movie, which then when later on when we took all the furniture out of the place, people would come in and they'd be mixed into the scenario in the same room, and that was the first time we said, well, what could we do in terms of technology? All we needed was something really simple, a program that would take the live video and the film and mix them together. And since they were both filmed from the same fixed camera, the magic of superimposing two images would do the rest. And all the time, the interest is not in the technology, but the interest is in what the technology can make happen in the real space.
Well, the Mayo Commission happened because I saw it quite by accident, actually, publicised at a very short notice in a journal, I think, or maybe the Visual Artists newsletter, and it really struck a chord with me because it was for two new special schools, St. Dibnah's and St. Nicholas's, and I, as a child, was dyslexic, and so that was a very major part of had a major forming influence on me. In particular, my parents were very, very committed to overcoming that problem. And so we travelled a lot around about Mayo, going to different classes in pottery and drawing and playing the guitar and that type of thing. And so I did overcome that problem. And so when the schools came up, the commission for the schools, it seemed very important, I think, to give something back for me. And so we applied to that with a participatory project. And part of the imagery, then the project is called We Can Fly, and part of the imagery that was strongest in my mind from Ballina was that wide river, the Moy, and overlooking the river, and that sense of space, and birds, particularly seagulls, wheeling over the river, because there's a lot of fisheries and salmon fishing goes on there. And
it also would have been a translation into a choreographic
idea.
And
so we thought we took that as a theme for the project, and we developed a project with the choreographer Cynthia Cummins, working with the children on that notion of flying, of flight. So developing dance ideas, but very simple gestural ideas through the interactive media, and around about that theme of flight. And the flight was significant as well, because it's very inspirational. It's about overcoming and your problems and aspiring. The staff are very, very open there in that school, and they're really, really looking for opportunities to bring the children out. And the children, their needs vary from quite not very severe difficulties. I mean, some of the children might be mildly autistic or Down syndrome, or right across the spectrum to children who are really almost completely isolated, so can only just move their eyes, or so there's a very, very broad spectrum of difficulties in that school. And so we managed to find a way, working with the staff, to engage with all of the children, and that was extraordinary. And the staff were really, really committed to bringing in the children that were very, very immobilized, and making them comfortable and explaining to them what was happening and getting them involved. And we played music as well that the children would, were particularly attached to kind of, make that an important experience for them. So I mean, it was very, very, very good experience.
When we went to Paris, we worked with an urbanist, Bernard Huet, who for about 10 years, a lot of the work that we did was with urbanism, and we got immersed in that sort of culture of how cities are made. And as artists, we became interested in how a footpath that you're walking down, is it the footpath that's making you walk in the straight line, or is the footpath there because you would naturally walk in that straight line? Is the footpath just built there to follow where you would go naturally, or are you being made to walk there because the footpath's there? And moving Dublin, it started off under another title, which was City Loops, where we were just interested in how everybody's day begins and ends at home, and they make a loop through the city, which probably most days would be the same, and then they're wearing a kind of a groove into the city, and that groove is their signature, their fingerprint on the city, and all those fingerprints together might make the paths. The Lewis line would be 500 fingerprints all tracing the same path and wearing a very deep groove into the urban fabric.
The motor cars obviously changed that enormously, and so people are no longer choosing their paths. In a medieval city, probably would have been formed by people's paths and building along, and we're not doing that anymore. We don't have that freedom. You've got to follow this highway there and get over to that hospital there. So I think that whole natural way of moving in the city has been disrupted by the modern transport means. And
obviously the motor car being facilitated by the sudden expansion of Dublin was something to do with that. The sudden facilitation of people who lived in Gorey to be able to actually work in the city centre of Dublin and have a viable possibility of living 100 kilometres away from where you work. And by making that possible, you created this sort of explosion of Dublin over the whole east coast of Ireland. And we kind of watched how that happened and talked to people about that, how that had happened and how it had affected their lives and how their lives were responding to that then.
I mean, for public art in Ireland, with the recession and less budgets, people are becoming much more afraid to take a risk, and that's a bit of a problem because it means they really want to know what they're getting for their money. You know, what's going to sit there on that spot in the garden. So that's a problem. I think that's going to happen more and more. But other than that, I think that public art in Ireland is quite progressive. I mean, I think generally I found that people are prepared to take on process-based work or work that isn't necessarily an object-based result, but might be a process or a publication or an experience. And I think that's great. I think that's fantastic that exists here. I think it goes back as well probably to our theatrical tradition, you know, that we really do see culture as something that's moving and happening.